Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training, and I'm going to do a video about Topaz Video Enhance AI. I've done a few videos about other AI upscaling programs recently, and I realized I haven't done one about this for ages, and in fact this is the one that I used most of the time. It was going to be one video, but I talked so much it's actually spread into two. So the first one, I'm going to look at all the changes in the interface since I last used Topaz, and obviously explain to you how it all works. And then in the second video, I'm going to look at a new thing they've just put into the beta version of Topaz, which is a new method of scaling. I mean, since my last, they have introduced a couple of new models, but the most recent one is a thing called Starlight, which uses very fancy ways of upscaling. And it's in beta, literally only just come out for something that we can use ourselves. So it is still evolving, but I thought it was worth doing as well as just looking at the rest of the program since my last video, which I believe was with version 2. I'm using a beta version. They've got a beta program where if you actually own Topaz Video AI, then you can get hold of the beta versions when they come out. So let's dive straight into how you use Topaz and how I would set it up, ignoring this completely new model which has literally come out. So when you open it up, you're presented with this, and it asks you to bring in some videos. So you can either browse and find them, or what I tend to do is just go drag them and drop them, and it brings it into the program. They've now divided it up, so you have sources, which you get to by pressing the sources button, which is obviously the stuff that you're actually going to process. Then you've got the thing where you do the processing, and then you've got a queue where you export stuff. And they've added little buttons so you can go a bit bigger on previews and stuff like that. They've also introduced the idea of projects. So I could say, go back to the sources and bring in a couple of other clips. Let me bring in the standard clips that I use all the time for this kind of stuff. So I've stacked up a couple of clips in there. You can then save this as a project. So let's call it something like... And then when you do stuff to this, you come back in, you load that project up, all those clips are there. It automatically loads up the last project you were using. So you might find that if you bring in a bunch of clips, you do something, you then come out of it, you finish doing all that stuff, you go back into it, it actually automatically loads those again. That's because they're all part of the project. The idea is you can bring in a whole bunch of clips, it remembers all the settings, you can always get back to them later on. And you can see I've got a variety of different clips here. You might even recognize this guy. This is something I found on a VHS tape. It's interlaced, which is why you've got all this gubbins on it. And I'm just going to use a little bit of that and try upscaling that as well. And the general mechanism for upscaling is the same as before. So you select the clip, then you come over to here, and then you've got types of enhancement. So this is where you decide what models you're going to use and what size you're going to go to. There's frame interpolation if you want to change the frame rate. So my original is 25 frames a second. Maybe you want it to be more. It's got this option to make it HDR as opposed to SDR, which I have to admit I've used, and it doesn't seem to have done that much for me. Stabilization, straightforward. It will actually make a wobbly clip stable. Love that one, that works really well. And then this thing, motion deblur. So that's trying to take any motion blur and get rid of it. And that will sharpen up the image quite a bit, but it will make it look a bit more staccato, because without motion blur, it looks more like you filmed something on a high shutter. You can then also see up here you've got codec settings, so this is how you actually want it to be made. I generally set mine to make ProRes files in this 422HQ format. So I've set that in the preferences. If you come over to File and then Preferences, in here you can go and find the default export settings and set it in there. But yeah, generally I have it set to ProRes. And then there's this new thing, try Starlight. I'll talk about that in a sec. But anyway, I want to do something to this clip, so I want to upscale it. The first thing I'm going to do is turn on Enhancement, open it up and decide for a start what resolution do I want it to go to, and do I want it to be whatever the original pixels were or square pixeled. I always recommend you stick that to square pixels. Standard definition DV is not square, it's slightly rectangular. Widescreen can be very, very stretched. I much prefer to go square pixels for anything I'm doing these days. It makes life easier. So I would set that first, and then I'd choose the frame size. With this particular clip here, I want to take this clip, which is a standard def clip, and upscale it to high definition. So I'm going to click on this, and I could choose this one, full high definition. What that will do is take that, scale it to high definition, but as it's a square picture, it's going to take it and leave black bars down the side, and I don't want to do that. I want to zoom into it and sort of chop the top and the bottom off. So I could choose to, instead of letterboxing it, crop it, but then it would automatically just chop off the top and the bottom. And what I'd like to do is upscale this whole thing so that it's as wide as high def, but then take it into an editing program and pan and scan it so I can get the best part of the image. So what I tend to do is I would not choose this, but I would come in here and say custom resolution and prioritize width, because I know I want it to be 1920 pixels wide. I want it to be high definition wide. It's actually going to come out to be higher than high definition if I do that, which is what I want to do because I'm going to take it and crop it afterwards. So I say prioritize width 1920, and then I come down here and choose my input method. One thing that has changed since the last version I did a tutorial on is I can bring in interlace footage and de-interlace it in here and get a good result out of it. So it says, is your footage progressive, interlaced, or interlaced progressive? Generally, either one of those two. This you use if you de-interlaced it with something else. You're actually saying, well, it did start as interlaced, but I've de-interlaced it elsewhere. So you might use that if you've gone and de-interlaced it using StackSrip, which is one of the things I mentioned in a previous video. This, I'm going to say it's interlaced progressive. And then from here, you can choose one of these models. And when I did my last video, I was saying I really like Proteus, and that was my favorite. Since then, they've introduced this thing, Iris. And I prefer Iris to Proteus. They are both very good. I just think this does much more sort of subtle upscaling and does a better job in most cases. What it can do sometimes is go bonkers with words. So if you've got some fuzzy words somewhere on screen, it can actually make absolute gibberish out of those fuzzy words. And occasionally it might do something a bit over the top with somebody's face. Generally, I find I prefer that. I'd mentioned these ones, Dione, before, but I don't use those at all. For me, it's either Iris or Proteus, and very probably Iris. And you'll notice I've got a low quality and a medium quality. I've actually found, even with low quality videos, I prefer the results with medium, so I very, very rarely use low quality. Of course, what you're going to do is click some of these things, do a quick test, try and get the best settings, and then you're going to make your video up. So you're going to try out stuff first. They've also added things in here, for example, to do a bit of focus fixing, which, yeah, it does explain stuff as you hang over it. This one, very, very rarely use. Strangely, I did find a time when I was using some really naff VHS footage where I was getting kind of cross-hatch pattern over some of the reds, and that was the only thing that cleared it up, but generally I don't use that. So generally I'll choose this, and I'll choose Enable Parameters, and I could just leave it to work it out itself, which means it'll change them as I go, but I always go to manual and I always set my own settings. Once you go to manual, I would then click on estimate and it sort of guesses the settings itself. And yeah, it thinks that is a good setting for it. And personally, I always change something. But having got some settings, you can then just do a quick render. So just like before, we have a preview. You can choose how long the preview is. Let's just do a second to make it a bit quicker. Click the render button. It marks out a little area in green down here because it's going to render a second's worth, and then it's going to go off and do the processing. Now, just like before, it's using your graphics card to do all the work. The better the graphics card, the faster this is going to be. And now you can see I've done a little bit of upscaling there, and this side is showing me the upscaled stuff, and this side is showing me the original, which, looking at that, you might say to yourself, it looks pretty similar, David. But first of all, this is now a high definition picture, so it's been shrunk down. So the first thing I always do is go to 100% because that gives me a much better view of what it looks like. Now you can start to see, yeah, oh yeah, that's looking a bit rough on that side. And once you apply this stuff, it looks a bit cleaner. Secondly, I've got this split view because I've set split view to be my favorite way of seeing stuff. You can click on that and it just shows you the whole image. You can click on that and it shows you side by side. I like to go for the split view because I can see the whole image in here and I can just swipe across it. Yeah, and I quite like that, but generally what I do is I come down and try to improve the detail as much as possible. So I'm going to whack this up quite a bit. In fact, I'll go to 100% and do another quick render. And there you can see, yeah, well, that's actually done quite a bit of difference. All the folds in the coat there, the trees in the background look a bit better. Done something slightly peculiar to his eye. So having a look at that, well, probably somewhere in between the two is probably going to be my favourite result. But it would be quite nice, actually, if I could compare both of those two. If I could put one at 100% and one at, say, 50% next to each other. Which you can do using these tabs up the top. So at the moment, I've got the original on this side, and my new one, it says Untitled on this side. If I want to do another one with some different settings, I can just pop in another tab, put in some different settings, So again, I'd have to come in here and I'd have to go custom resolution and put the numbers in. And do all the things I did a minute ago, but this time I'm going to put the approved detail to about 50 and render that. And now you can see, yep, that's what 50 looks like. That's what 100 looks like. You can see 100 actually is putting a lot more detail and nice fine details in the hair, even though it's doing something peculiar to his eyes on a couple of occasions. Whereas that one's putting less in there, but you can see it is still better. And you might prefer to have that as opposed to this, because you might not like the way that 100 actually does something peculiar to his eyes. That's the point of having a couple of tabs up here. Now I actually made up a new tag just by clicking on the plus and then setting everything up again, because I could have just gone to the tab itself, right clicked on it and say duplicate it, and then I'd have got a copy and I could have fiddled with some sliders on that. So let's just change a few little things here, let that render, and now you can see I've got that one, or that one, and you can compare them and see what's your favorite look. I think I'm probably heading towards this one here, because I've got more details in clothes, the leaves in the background, and it hasn't done too bad of things to the eyes. If I'm happy with that, I can now go and export it into a final movie, and it'll make it up in this format here. Now to export, I'd use one of these things down here. Cloud export basically means you send it to them, and then they do it for you. They do charge you for that. You get a certain number of credits and you have to pay so much per seconds of footage to upscale it. And it gets pretty expensive. So I just don't do that. I never use the cloud export. That's because I've got a fairly decent graphics card, so I can do it on my computer. So I'm either going to go export as or export. Quick export will just make it and it'll put it next to the original. Export as lets you decide where it's going to go and give it a name. Now, as soon as I press one of those, it comes up with the export queue. So if I go to that, you can see I've got one item in the export queue, gives me a little preview of what's going on, and you can see the clock popping away here and telling you how long it's going to take. As before, names actually tell you what's going on. So I've got the original name of the clip plus the word iris afterwards, meaning it's using this iris model to export. Once it's done, I can click on View Export and I can have a look at it, and that's come out pretty well. It's possibly a little bit fuzz. Again, you probably won't see it on YouTube, but it's possibly a little bit fuzzy, so maybe I want to up the noise reduction to get rid of some of the fuzz. But that actually done a pretty good job and made it quite a lot better than the original. It is a high 8 shot in the first place, and it's never going to look like proper high definition. Other things you can do, you can click on these three little dots here and you can choose to show it in Explorer. And it'll just bring it up in Explorer for you to play back, or you can close it, or you can open it in an external player, which in my case is VLC. But I want to go a bit further than that, so I'm going to go back to the source. I'm going to click on the little X, come back in here, and I'm going to fiddle a bit more. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add on a bit of motion deblur. Now let me do a quick render of that. Now this is applying two things, so it's going to take longer. Again, how long it takes depends, of course, on your graphics card. In this system, I'm using an NVIDIA 3060, which is 2 or 3 years old now. They've just come out with the 5060 Ti's, and everything, of course, on graphics cards gets better pretty quickly. But yeah, this one still works, which is nice. And there we are. I've actually got something which I think is a little bit sharper, although if you watched it on the playback, it's a little bit more staccato. Let's just do a quick export of that. Look at the export queue. That's now got thtum and iris. Thtum is the motion blur, and iris obviously being the upscaling. It's going to take a little bit longer than the last one, and when it is, you can have a look at it. And I think generally that it does sharper quality, but it does look like it's done like on a high shutter speed, so it's a bit staccato. Again, you possibly won't see the difference on YouTube because of the way YouTube will mangle this video. Like when he jumps up here, that's not quite as natural as it was before, but the image itself is a little bit sharper. I tend not to use that for most of my video, but say if I'm doing something like upscaling something I then want to green screen or key out, then I would use it, because if you get rid of the motion blur, then the edges are cleaner, which makes it easier to key out. And then in my compositing program like After Effects, I can actually add motion blur back in. Particularly, actually, I found I was doing some old episodes of Doctor Who from the 1960s, so they're all a bit blurry in the first place. An episode of Doctor Who was shown on a television, then they've converted it to film, then they've converted it back to DVD. You know, it's gone through lots of things, and actually the motion is fileable early. So for my old black and white stuff, that really worked very well. But for most stuff, I don't. But it's worth knowing it's there, because sometimes that can do a better result. But yeah, I generally come in, fiddle with these settings, see what the results are like, and then choose the best one. In addition to Iris, they have invented another couple of models. So the first one, which came in sometime during version 6, is a thing called Rhea. You don't get Rhea if you're choosing interlaced as a source, but if you go progressive, then you do get it, and that's Rhea is this thing. And Rhea is basically designed for doing 4K upscaling. So ideally for this, I would be choosing to go out to 4K, and that's where it does its best results. You can actually choose Rhea and output at high definition, but what it does is it upscales it to 4K and then it downscales it again afterwards. Rhea is supposed to be a combination of Iris and Proteus. So in my previous video, I thought Proteus was the best. This is supposed to be a bit of both. Again, for this, sometimes I find a result that I prefer to Iris, but most of the time I actually prefer Iris. But what you do, choose it, do a quick preview. If you're happy with the preview, then make up a new bit of video. Again, take a little bit of time to do the preview, a little bit longer very probably the first time you use it, because it actually has to download stuff, but then I'll be able to see what that looks like. Obviously, you'll have to compare them to each other. By the way, you do also get a preview queue here. If you click on that, you notice that I've actually got in here a list of the previews that have been done. And I can go to these little dots here and say show in Explorer, and it brings up those previews as files that you can play outside of Topaz completely. These are the 3 files I've just previewed. So we've got my 2 Iris previews. That'll be the 50% one. That'll be the 100% one. And then we've got the Rhea one. But of course, you can also look at the preview inside of here. And I do find this happens sometimes, that the 2 things here don't match, but I can still see that like his face here has come out to be a lot cleaner and a lot clearer. The eyes, actually, in this case, don't seem to have gone quite so bonkers, but that might just be because I'm in a slightly different part of the clip. And you actually might notice here, I am getting some peculiar sort of interlacing looks, some stripes, because this clip is actually interlaced. Told it is progressive, so let me use Rhea, but it is actually interlaced, which is why I've got this nonsense on it. And Rhea doesn't cure interlacing, unlike Proteus does and Iris does. So for Rhea, I'd want to deinterlace it first. This setting up here, and I like that as an option. I want to save that as a preset that I can use in future videos. Now we can always do presets, and it's pretty much the same as before, except now I just come up to this tab and right click and say save as preset and give it a name. You can't make them very long names, so I'll make it a simple name, but you can include the export settings in it. And now I've made a preset that I can apply to other clips. Presets are listed up here. As you can see, I've got a few I've made already, and you can also create new ones here, but generally I do it by there. And I can also do other things, like I've got 5 different sources in here. Now I could, for each of them, come in here and I could come up to the presets, choose that preset, and then it applies those settings to the image. And I could go through, do that one at a time. But I can also right click on this thing and say apply to all sources. So if I do that, they're all suddenly going to get these same settings. When I'm doing an edit, I will actually bring in a bunch of individual clips. My other video explained how I would take an edit from Edius or Resolve and make up a lot of single individual clips. I take all those clips, bring them all in here. Probably want to put the same settings on all of them. I don't want to have to go each one individually. So I'll choose one, then I'll just apply to all. And then I've got the same settings for all of them. So let's go back to this one, right click, apply to all sources, and now I should have the same settings on all the sources. You can see here, this is a terrible looking fuzzy shot. There is a very good reason why I brought in this terrible looking fuzzy shot. Now the next thing you might say was, I can expect one from here. How the hell do I get all of them going? Do I actually have to keep loading each one up individually and click this button? Actually, no. Once you've got a preset on them, you can just click on the little dots next to them, say select all, and then if you click the export button, because I've applied the same settings to the lot, it'll do them all at once. It'll bung them all into the export queue, and then it'll go through them one at a time. It'll have to wait for this one to finish first, but then it'll go through and do them one at a time. So you can see in this queue that I've actually got something going already. It's been exporting whilst I've been talking about presets and so on. So it's added all those clips on afterwards. If I want to get rid of these clips, I could just click on these little dots and say close all, but it'll stop the one that's actually in progress. So what instead I'm going to do is to go to the little dots for each individual clip and choose close, and then it'll shut them down individually but leave the thing that's actually processing still going. So it's quite easy, once you know how to do it, to take some settings and apply it to everything and bung them all in the export queue quickly. I don't think it's immediately obvious, but it is actually quite easy. Export as is grayed out if you try to select multiple clips, so they're all going to go right next to where the originals are. Frankly, that's what I do most of the time anyway. Now, I've chosen these clips for various reasons. First of all, the first two I've used many times before, so it seems sensible just to show them off again. So if you do look at my old videos, you can see what used to happen with those. This clip is really fuzzy and horrible. This was 8mm camera. You can see it's fuzzy, it's got crap at the bottom, it looks a bit awful. I've struggled and struggled and struggled to make this look decent. And it's the same for the others. I brought in this shot, which again is particularly awful. And then I brought in this shot, which comes from a VHS tape. It's interlaced for a start. Also, there's quite a lot more of this, and I really only want to do the very start of it. So what I'm going to do here is mark an in point on there and just go to the end of this advert and mark an out point. When I export, it'll just do that bit. And yeah, I can try my preset on that. If I do a quick split screen, you can see this is the before, this is the after. Done quite a nice job there in bringing in things back on that face. It's still a bit fuzzy. It's still obviously nothing like high definition, but it has improved it quite a bit. I think I'd also like to take this into an editing program and brighten it up. And here's the same thing using Proteus, which looks a bit sharper, but that started to add in a lot of nonsense around here. So if I saw that kind of nonsense, I'd come down to the improved detail and chop that down a bit, and then I'd do another quick render and see what it comes out like. But again, here I still think with this kind of stuff that Iris does the better job than Proteus. This is again interlaced, so I can't really try something like Rhea on it because Rhea only likes progressive stuff, so I might want to de-interlace that somewhere else. So that's gone through the new interface and Iris, Rhea and so on with the latest version of Topaz. In the second video, I'll look at the new model that was added, Starlight, which does take considerably longer to process. Is it worth it? Is it worth putting in that extra time? I love the fact that we got a new option, but obviously you got to compare the time against the quality. The comparisons of quality will also be in the second video. So I mentioned I would be comparing all these different models. Well, the comparisons will then be in the second video. So that'll come up on the channel in the next day or so. Obviously, like this video, subscribe to the channel so you get a notification of when that pops up. Don't forget, of course, to go to my website for more information on everything I do, www.dvctraining.co.uk. Or if you've got a problem, want me to make a system, whatever, either email me or give me a ring, david@dvctraining.co.uk. Hope you found this information useful, and I'll see you next time.